A sitting U.S. senator just said, out loud, on the record, what Washington has been too afraid to admit for 50 years. That this country has been quietly, systematically, and almost legally robbing its own children. Not metaphorically, mathematically. What you're about to hear is Senator Ron Johnson, not a progressive activist, not a think tank economist, sitting in a Senate Finance Subcommittee hearing, with the CBO director confirming his numbers one by one. We collect 17.1% of GDP in taxes. We spend 23 to 24%. That gap? We borrow it. Every year. And we spend $6 on every senior citizen for every $1 we spend on a child under 18. While children are the poorest demographic in America, while seniors are the wealthiest.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Senator Warren, why don't you bring that one chart up on taxes? Again, I need to clarify things. Because it's very easy to cherry pick a particular year and say, we're going to pick this as percentage of spending and this is what it's always been. It's just not true. So, Director Swagel, this is pretty accurate, right? I mean, this is accurate. I mean, over 66 years, the average amount we've collected in taxes is 17.1%.
That's right. I have a 50-year figure in front of me, but it's almost the same. Yep.
Yeah.
But current spending is a real aberration, correct? I mean, I'm going back. By the way, the Bush tax cuts were extended under President Obama. Not all of them, but the vast majority of them. Mm-hmm. But go back to 2017. We were at 17.1% of GDP, and we were at 20.6% of spending of outlays, correct? When we actually had surpluses, I think spending was as low as 18%. And we did have that aberration of revenue approaching 21. I'm not sure we ever hit 21, but darn close. But again, that was a booming economy during the Clinton years, okay? The dot-com economy. So it happens, but it's an aberration. In general, at some point in time, you have to recognize, here's the reality. We collect about 17, we can extract about 17% of GDP in revenue. Would you agree with that, Director Swagel?
That's been as your chart shows, that's the historical average the tax revenue fluctuates right around.
So again, what's an aberration is we've gone from, and spending was increasing. We hit $2 trillion around the year 2000, up to 4.4 through 2019. Then all of a sudden, bam, we hit 6.5 and never looked back. This year we'll spend $7.4 trillion. It's just undeniable what's primarily driving the deficits is spending, and neither side wants to increase taxes beyond the 17.1. Obama extended the Bush tax cuts. You blame Bush for passing them, but Obama extended them. I was here, I extended them as well. I don't like increasing taxes. You know, I realize you can only squeeze so much out of a turnip. And then, again, when Democrats were in control and they had the House, the Senate, and the presidency, they did reconciliation, they could have canceled the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. They didn't do that. Again, I think it would have been very unwise for them to do that. What they could have done is what responsible leadership did after World War II, going from 11.7 to over 40%, and then come right back down to 11.4% of GDP. We're not at 20% of GDP in spending. We're at 23, 24%. It's a spending problem. Now, I was willing to vote against the One Big Beautiful Bill because we weren't cutting spending enough. I thought, well, if we're not willing to reduce spending, maybe we're going to have to increase taxes, not this way. One thing you have to admit, we are increasing revenue through tariffs. And as much as I hate increasing taxes, if you have to increase them, it's probably not a bad way to go. You know, from my standpoint, you want a simple tax, you want a low rate, you want a broad base. And tariffs have the added advantage that foreigners, to a certain extent, over some period of time, pay part of that tax. So Trump administration is tariffing. Now, again, it's creating all kinds of disruptions, instability, uncertainty in the economy. Maybe that's something we ought to look at. Maybe we ought to codify a generalized tariff. And I'm open to these discussions, but we have to talk honestly. We have to be agreeing on the same figures. We can't be taking a look and cherry picking a particular year and this percentage. You got to look at the whole thing. I don't have the full historical tables where I can go back and, really kind of school folks. Let's get back to what has happened in terms, because I think it's unconscionable. what we've been doing since the Great Society, basically robbing from our young people for the benefit of the old people. I don't think the elderly understand this, the extent they're doing it, how we are literally mortgaging our children's future. But again, you all mentioned it, so why don't you put in your own words in terms of what we've done to our kids? Director Swagel.
No, that's right. That's one way of looking at the fiscal imbalance. The trajectory means that future generations, our children today and their children, will bear the burden of the deficit reduction that has to come at some point in the future.
Ms. McGinnis.
So we try to focus just on the effect of the bottom line, and we try not to get too into this is a good policy or a bad policy. But if there is one thing that our budget reflects, and a budget is a statement of a nation's priorities, if there is one thing that I just find so alarming and frustrating and disappointing, it's that we choose to spend $6 per senior on every one that we spend on children under 18. And this is a value thing, and people can have different priorities, but I do not think that reflects a budget that is sound for the growth of the country, the strength of the country, and the right thing to do. When Social Security began, seniors were the poorest cohort there was, and it was very important to start that program. Today, children are the poorest cohort, and seniors are the richest. And the problem is the constituency is immensely powerful. And I know that with changes that we're going to make, we're going to protect seniors. Current seniors do not need to worry about it. Though I will say there are so many well-off seniors who come to me when I'm talking about and say, I don't need it. I would give it back if I knew it were going to the program to strengthen it. So these are important programs, but we need to think about how we're reforming them and the priorities in terms of investment in children and human capital and all of those things. So it is absolutely a value that I think is reflecting political power and not what the country's values are.
Ms. Kibble, do you have the stats in terms of percent of people in poverty, young versus old?
Oh, I can't remember off the top of my head, but poverty for seniors is extremely low, largely thanks to
and it's higher
Social
for
Security.
youth, correct?
It is much higher for
And in addition to that, $1 to $6 spending, that'd be bad enough if we were spending with a balanced budget. But it's $1 versus $6, and
We're borrowing
money, which is going to rob our children, our future.
Yeah.
Again, it's unconscionable. It's one of the reasons I was not, by the way, it wasn't a no tax on, you're not, very few people pay tax on Social Security, correct, Mr. Swagel? I mean, it'd be you have to be at the very top.
It's very small, and the bill reduced it. That's right.
It wasn't a no tax on Social Security. We just increased the standard deduction, correct?
So if
you've got a senior that makes $100,000 and you got a 30-year-old who can't buy a house, who's struggling, trying to raise a family, making $100,000, who has the lower marginal tax rate? Mr. Schwagel.
No, it's you've got the balance there. That's the challenge.
The elderly person making the same amount of money is going to have a lower marginal tax rate. Is that fair, America? Mm-hmm. It's not. Maybe we can come to an area of agreement on that. So I know one thing was talked about, and then I'll turn it back over to you, Senator Smith, that we need to take the cap off of tax, payroll tax on income. Social Security was set up as a forced savings plan to cover people if they were lucky enough to reach retirement. The retirement age back then was set, I think, 65, and life expectancy was under 62. Now that's a retirement program that's going to work. It's going to last. And there's there were dozens of people that were working versus every person on Social Security. Now we're getting close to 2 to 1. Correct? But again, it was a forced savings program. The idea was we're going to force you to save. We're going to invest it for you, so that money is going to be yours that we'll dole out to you if you get just lucky enough to retire. That was the concept. It wasn't a welfare program. So if you remove the cap on the payroll tax, you're going to dramatically increase the marginal tax rate for people. It turns Social Security into a complete welfare system, is what it does. That's why, again, I'd be opposed to it. It'd be an incredibly harmful tax. But again, you have to be honest about this. Was how Social Security was set up. This is what, taking that top off, again, those solutions simply don't work. They're economically harmful. They're simply not fair. And what's really not fair is how much we spend on seniors while we're impoverishing our young people. Senator Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually have a floor speech in about 15 minutes, and so I don't have any further questions, and I want to thank you for the hearing.
Okay. Well, thank you. And again, appreciate you helping facilitate this. I hope we can have more of these. We just have to lay these things out. I mean, I'm so appreciative of the No Labels group and what we're trying to do, and we're kind of going through each one of these things, whether it's defense spending, and just laying out the actual figures so we can agree on that, because until we do that, we're just going to keep fighting, okay? But anyway, really appreciate your cooperation on this, and thank you again for the time and effort of the witnesses. Members wishing to submit questions for the record for today's witnesses have until 5 p.m. on Wednesday, March 18th. With that, this hearing of the Subcommittee of Fiscal Responsibility and Economic Growth of the Senate Committee of Finance is concluded.
Let me tell you what I did after watching this hearing. I pulled up the historical budget tables the senator was referencing. Because when someone in Congress starts publicly agreeing with their own CBO director, you pay attention. Here's what those tables show. Over 66 years, through Democratic presidents and Republican ones, through booms and recessions, this country has collected an average of 17.1% of GDP in federal tax revenue. GDP is the total value of everything the economy produces in a year. 17.1% of it. That's the ceiling. That's how much the economy will give before taxpayers push back hard enough to change the government. Not a law, a political reality. And it is held for 6 decades. Now here's the problem. We are currently spending 23 to 24% of GDP. That gap, we borrow it. Not as a crisis measure, not as a wartime exception, as standard operating procedure. Federal spending was $2 trillion in 2000, $4.4 trillion by 2019, $7.4 trillion this year. No war, no pandemic, just the accumulated weight of decisions nobody wanted to reverse, because reversing them costs votes. And here is where it stops being abstract. The federal government spends $6 on every senior citizen for every $1 it spends on a child under 18. I want you to understand why, because it didn't happen by accident. When Social Security launched, seniors were the poorest group in America. The program made sense, a safety net for people falling through the floor. But here's what changed, and what policy never updated to reflect. Today, children are the poorest demographic. Seniors are the wealthiest. The ratio is still 6-1, because seniors vote in every election, and children cannot vote at all. That's not a conspiracy. That's democratic incentives running exactly as designed, when nobody is watching closely enough to correct them. One of the witnesses said something I keep coming back to. A budget is a statement of a nation's priorities. So I'll ask you directly, is this ours? Borrowing from the future, sending it backwards, while the kids who repay that debt grow up as the poorest cohort in the country? There was one more thing in this hearing I can't let pass. The idea of removing the payroll tax cap, making high earners pay Social Security taxes on all their income, not just the first $168,000. Sounds fair. I understand the instinct. But here's the mechanism underneath. Social Security was designed as a forced savings program. You pay in based on what you earn. You get back based on what you paid. That is the contract. Remove the cap, and wealthy earners pay in far more than they can ever receive back. You've converted a savings program into a wealth transfer. And wealth transfers are politically fragile. The people funding them eventually stop supporting them. That fragility could collapse the very program millions depend on. It's not a clean fix. Nothing about this is. What I took from this hearing wasn't a solution. It was something rarer, an honest diagnosis. A senator, a CBO director, a budget analyst, a room that wasn't performing for cameras, and one number that should be on every front page in the country, $6 to 1. If this reframed anything for you, share it with someone who still thinks the debt is someone else's problem. Subscribe for more breakdowns that connect the numbers to the people actually paying them, because the decisions made in that room are being made in your name.